Harmony before the fall. Let us go back 1300 years. India, under the Guptas, was a land of balance, spiritually vibrant, intellectually brilliant, and culturally unified. The Varna system, though hierarchical, was not oppressive in structure. Brahmins preserved knowledge. Kshatriyas defended the land. Vaishyas enabled trade. Shudras offered essential services with dignity, not shame. There was respect between roles, movement across roles, a sense of belonging, not exclusion. But this harmony was fragile, and soon it would be tested. The first breaches 700 to 1000 CE. In 712 CE, Muhammad bin Qasim entered Sindh, the first Islamic conquest on Indian soil. Temples were raided, locals were forced to convert, but this was just the beginning. By 1000 CE, Mahmud of Ghazni had launched 17 ruthless invasions, from Mathura to Somnath. He looted gold, destroyed temples, and slaughtered priests. Yet Ghazni never stayed to rule. His goal was wealth, not power. So, while fear entered the land, civil society still stood, shaken but not shattered. The cracks begin 1027 to 1206 CE. In the aftermath of Ghazni's raids, something subtle started to shift. In cities, people began looking over their shoulders. Villages grew more inward. Rituals became stricter. Upper Varnas, especially Brahmins, turned cautious. It wasn't systemic collapse, but the first cracks had appeared. Traditions hardened, boundaries thickened, trust thinned. From Ghori to the Delhi Sultanate, 1206 to 1526 CE, then came the blow that changed everything. In 1192, Muhammad Ghori defeated Prithviraj Chauhan. Delhi fell, and from its ashes rose the Delhi Sultanate, a regime that would last over 300 years. Temples were razed, Sanskrit schools dismantled, jizya tax imposed, forced conversions became frequent. Brahmins were removed from administrative posts. Kshatriyas were either killed or made to serve. Vaishyas were taxed heavily. But it was the Shudras and tribals who were hit differently. Not attacked, but used. Their labor was still needed, for land, for construction, for daily services. They continued their work, now under new rulers. To them, it was survival. To others, it was collaboration. This is where perception begins to fracture reality. A southward shift, 1200 to 1700 CE. That's 500 years. As northern elites fled persecution, many moved south to Vijayanagara, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and coastal Karnataka. They brought stories of destruction. Temples burned, rituals mocked, ancestors humiliated. Whether those stories were real or exaggerated, they created an atmosphere of fear. Southern rulers, even if untouched, turned conservative. Orthodoxy became policy. Caution replaced cultural openness. And then came rulers like Tipu Sultan, who, despite being celebrated today, enforced mass conversions, destroyed temples, and persecuted non-Muslims alike. Thus, invasion was no longer a geography. It had become a mindset, spreading far beyond the battlefield. The survival perception split. This is the heart of the transformation. Unlike the upper castes, the Shudras couldn't flee. They were rooted to land, bound to labor. When new rulers took control, they stayed behind, plowing fields, cleaning streets, serving temples, guarding doors, not by choice, by compulsion. But those who fled, Brahmins, Kshatriyas, merchants, saw things differently. To them, the ones who stayed had served the enemy. This created a moral chasm. What was survival for one looked like pollution to the other. Shudras were no longer seen as brothers. They became the impure, not by deed, but by association. Temples denied them entry. Rituals excluded them. Respect vanished. And thus began the slow descent from Shudra to untouchable. Mughal rule and final collapse, 1526 to 1707 CE. Babur came with cannons. Akbar offered a breath of tolerance, but Aurangzeb brought fire and fanaticism. He reimposed jizya, destroyed Kashi Vishwanath and Mathura temples, targeted Hindus, Sikhs, and Marathas. By now, the caste pyramid had collapsed into walls. Brahmins shrank into dogma. Kshatriyas split into rebels and courtiers. Vaishyas complied for survival. Shudras and tribals were fully abandoned, socially, spiritually, politically. Temples no longer protected them. Kings no longer acknowledged them. Brahmins no longer included them. They were now the forgotten foundation of a broken society. The others who fell. The collapse wasn't limited to caste Hindus. Jains were tortured. Buddhists, already weakened by Bakhtiyar Khilji's destruction of Nalanda, disappeared to Tibet and Nepal. Heterodox sects, folk traditions, and even Brahmin subsects splintered into isolations. Where once India had coexisted with 1,000 truths, now there was fear, suspicion, and silence. Psychological fallout, late 1600s to 1700s. By the time Aurangzeb died in 1707, India's soul was already fractured. Brahmins had become gatekeepers of orthodoxy. Kshatriyas had lost unity. Vaishyas clung to trade for security. Shudras, tribals, outcasts were invisible. They were no longer just low in status. They were erased from memory. India forgot that all Varnas were once vital, that no role was dirty, only made so by fear and distrust. And in that forgetting was born the Dalit. The next ruin begins. The British didn't invent caste, but they found a society already shattered and froze it into law. They monetized division, institutionalized identities, turned fractures into policies. But that is the story for our next video. India's caste collapse didn't happen overnight. It happened inch by inch for over 1,000 years. More explicitly in the 500 years between 1200 to 1700. Through invasions, through trauma, through survival misread as betrayal, and finally through forgetting who we truly were. If we must heal, we must first remember, not just the facts, but the pain behind them. This is not just history. This is a scar, and healing begins with truth.